thank you, all 780 participants who are joining this emergency conversation about abortion rights or non-rights in this country. I think it's very tough right now. This is a crisis of democracy. It is a crisis of a court which is in many ways illegitimate, not many popular votes put it in power, trying to take away rights. Today we meet in the horror, the aftermath of Texas. The language is almost inadequate in a way. It's unfathomable. 213 mass shootings in the first 145 days of 2022. And so it's in prayers. And we ask why we must endure the ceaseless constancy of violence. Violence in the subject we're talking about today, a violence of stripping rights away from people, from women across this country. I don't think of it as red, blue, but it's going to affect every person, families, women, children, everyone. We gather and we did a special issue just the other week about the fight for abortion after Roe falls. And I recommend all of it to you. I just want to read the last lines of Katha Pollitt, the editorial, because I think it speaks to the moment we're in. She writes, "Don't let yourself feel pre-defeated. We can win this eventually, but despair will make it harder. Concentrate on what you do now, protecting and expanding rights where possible, supporting abortion services, and above all, getting pro-choice legislators into office." And she talks about change and organizing at different times. So what I really value about Katha's is it's both about the ideas we need to keep it in mind, that we're in a crisis of democracy, but also what we can do, because that's going to be critical at a time when so many are telling us we can't do this, that. So thank you for joining. I want to introduce the moderator, Regina Mahone, who joined us about a year ago as a senior editor at The Nation and co-author with Renee Bracey Sherman of Countering Abortion Slaying, which is slated for release in the winter of 2024 by Amistad. Previously, Regina served as vice president for editorial content at Courier Newsroom, a media company dedicated to helping people better understand what's happening in local and national governments. I know we'll talk quite a bit about local, state, what governments, what we can do. And prior to that, Regina was vice president, managing editor at Rewire News Group, a nonprofit media organization devoted to evidence-based reporting on reproductive, sexual health, rights, and justice. So please welcome Regina and welcome our panelists who will offer sanity and help us think through this grim moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina. So I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. Elie Littlefield is the Nation's new abortion access correspondent, an investigative reporter who focuses on the intersection of religion and healthcare. Elie was previously a reporter for Rewire, where we work together, and a news producer for the award-winning news hour Democracy Now! Elie has reported for various newspapers, including the Los Angeles Times and the Enterprise in Brockton, Massachusetts, where she won awards for her investigative reporting on nepotism in city government. She's also a recipient of a 2014 I.F. Stone Award from the Investigative Fund at the Nation Institute and a 2018 Adelante Fellowship from the International Women's Media Foundation. Katha Pollitt is the award-winning subject to debate columnist for The Nation and the renowned author of numerous works of both nonfiction and poetry. Many of Pollitt's contributions to The Nation are compiled in 3 books: Reasonable Creatures, Essays on Women and Feminism, Subject to Debate, Sense and Dissents on Women, Politics, and Culture, and Virginity or Death, and other social and political issues of our time. Her most recent book is Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights, which the New York Times listed as a notable book of 2014. And Elie Mystal is the Nation's justice correspondent, covering the courts, the criminal justice system, race, and politics. A graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and a former associate at, and I'm going to butcher this, I apologize, de Beauvoir and Plimpton, Elie.
Double voice.
I wasn't even close. Mystal was the executive editor of Above the Law prior to joining The Nation, a prolific Twitter personality, as you all know. He's a frequent guest on MSNBC, CNN, SiriusXM, and numerous radio programs and podcasts. Since joining The Nation, Mystal has become one of the most sought after legal analysts in the country. His new book, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, which we'll hear about today, was recently released by the New Press and has quickly jumped to the number 12 nonfiction book on the New York Times bestsellers list. So thank you so much and welcome to our incredible panelists. Okay. It's been an incredibly heavy week. As if we needed it, the events of the week have served as a good reminder of why we need reproductive justice. After the Robb Elementary School shooting, Avow, a Texas-based abortion rights organization, tweeted, quote, "We deserve better than a government that politicizes our access to healthcare and bullies transgender children, but refuses to take action on gun control. The right to parent without fear your children will be killed by gun violence is reproductive justice," quote. And an image appearing with the tweet said, "You deserve to parent your child without fear that he or she will be hurt or killed. Freedom from violence is reproductive justice," end quote. So Amy, I want to start with you. You've reported extensively on the intersections of oppressions facing people who can become pregnant and their families. Can you talk about the importance of framing these fights, from abortion bans to unjust immigration policies like Title 42 to trans healthcare, as reproductive justice issues?
Thank you so much for that question, Regina. And I just want to say what an honor and comfort really it is to be here in conversation with all of you and in this community during such a difficult week. I mean, this is where we are right now, right? This horrific school shooting, which it just, Regina and I both are pandemic parents with young children who were born during this terrible, deadly pandemic, and seeing the images and hearing the stories coming out of Texas, a state that's been living under a 6-week abortion ban for 9 months and has this other emergency going on in the background. And then remembering that yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of George Floyd's killing by police, that on that same day yesterday, Oklahoma's governor signed a total abortion ban into law. And so this morning, for the first time in almost 50 years, for the first time since Roe v. Wade, hundreds of thousands of people who can become pregnant in Oklahoma are waking up in a state that has gone completely dark when it comes to abortion access, where abortion is no longer available. And this is the first, light that has gone completely out. We're going to see probably about 26 states that are going to ban abortion. And what a moment to pause and acknowledge the urgency of seeing how these issues are so integrally connected. As Katrina said, this is a democracy issue. This is a voting rights issue. This is about gerrymandering, and thank goodness we have this framework of reproductive justice that tells us police violence that takes away Black sons and daughters, school shootings that take away sons and daughters, 2nd, 3rd, 4th graders, immigration policies that separate families, denial of care to transgender children, and policies that terrify parents into thinking their trans kids are going to be taken away if they accept them, and this rapidly diminishing right to abortion in our country. What gives me hope is that I see an increasing tendency of all of these movements to understand that these rights are inseparable, that they are intertwined, that the baby formula crisis facing parents, the vast and deep economic crisis and inequality facing families in America are inseparable from abortion access. And reproductive justice is finally, I think, this framework for thinking about the right to parent in safe communities, the right to be free from violence, and that fundamental right to abortion have to be all thought of together. And what gives me hope, and I think we need to find hope, as that last line of Katha's editorial points to, we have to summon hope in this moment, reproductive justice and that framework and the fact that it is being embraced more and more and taking its place in the center of the frame, that's what gives me hope in this moment. So.
Thank you so much, Amy. Elie and Katha, do you want to jump in with any thoughts? We are going to dig into your pieces and the issues around the articles that appeared in the abortion special issue, but if you have any thoughts you'd like to add just on the interconnectedness of the issues, please do jump in.
I have something to say that actually just occurred to me while Amy was speaking so eloquently. And that is one of the great things about the reproductive justice framework is that it connects motherhood and abortion. And I think in most people's minds, or many people's minds, they're very different, that you either have an abortion or you have a baby. And then the caricature of women who have abortions becomes powerful, which is they are sluts, they hate children, they're cold-hearted career women, that kind of thing. But actually, abortion and maternity are very connected. It's the same woman at a different time in her life, either before she's ready to have a baby, or maybe she's already got her family completed, or maybe she wants that baby, but she can't have it because of physical, because of health issues with her or the fetus. And I think that it's a very humane framework that connects women's lives at all different stages. And I really honor it for that.
I'll just add that, a lot of times we people on the left like to say that Republicans only care about life when it's still in the womb. As soon as you get out of the womb, all of a sudden they don't care about your life and they're willing to let you get shot. They're willing to let you, not going to support your education, not going to support your health care. And all of that is true. But people need to understand hypocrisy is not a deal breaker for Republicans. Okay, like you can put all of your arguments on the table. You can explain logically step A, step B. You can show them where they've gone astray. They don't care, because what Republicans have is not logic, it is power. And as long as the Republicans have power, they don't care about how hypocritical they seem to other people. They have power, they're using their power, they're going to continue using their power, and just because we have a better argument doesn't matter to them. And so people need to always understand there is a zero-sumness to this game. You're not going to convince people based on their hypocrisy. They're already comfortable with their own hypocrisy and they're doing it anyway.
Absolutely. And we're going to dig into some of those strategies that you've written about so eloquently. And I also just want to acknowledge it is with thanks to the Black women who coined the term reproductive justice and framework that we honor that legacy, which includes all people who can become pregnant and the rights of queer people. Now, let's dig into why we're here today, which is to talk about abortion. A few things to make clear. Abortion is legal in the United States. But as Amy mentioned, abortion right now is not legal in the state of Oklahoma because the governor last night signed into law a total abortion ban. So if you are in Oklahoma, or you know people who are in Oklahoma, or you might encounter someone who's in Oklahoma who might need an abortion, please know they deserve access to abortion care. There are people working around the clock to support you and them. Robin Marty, operations director of the West Alabama Women's Center, tweeted that that clinic is able to provide single-day appointments and can get you in within a week of your call. And so we're going to share a link. You can visit that link for more information. You can share that link with other people, tweet it. And if you want to support folks in Oklahoma and Texas and other states certain to ban abortion after Roe, please consider donating to an abortion fund, including the Roe Fund in Oklahoma. You can find more information about these funds at the link we'll share in the chat as well. And I also want to know, abortion is healthcare. I've had an abortion. It was the best decision for me and has brought so many important and meaningful things into my life, including the chance to later become a mother. And no matter your reason for wanting an abortion, I hope you know, and I hope you'll share the gospel that abortion is essential healthcare, because that's what it is. So clearly, Justice Alito's leaked draft opinion is weighing on all of us. Elie, in a recent piece, you talked about a 3-part legal strategy abortion rights advocates should follow to challenge a post-Roe world order. What's that strategy? And I'm also wondering if we all need to become lawyers now.
Yeah, well, no, I would not suggest everybody becoming lawyers because it's expensive and doesn't really help a lot of things. And you can read about it in the papers. You don't need to go through 3 years of school. No, so my three-part strategy, I hesitate even, Regina, for you to call it a strategy because strategy suggests success. And this is not something that I expect to be successful. This is about kind of digging your heels into the ground and forming a line of resistance, right? I think that in states like Oklahoma, in states like Texas, in states like the 26 that are basically going to ban abortion as soon as Dobbs comes out, you need to flood those states with lawsuits that will fail. Because again, like I said, Republican judges and justices do not care about logical consistency, do not care about good legal argument, but lawsuits that must be brought anyway, because according to the Republicans, the reason why they are allowed to overturn Roe v. Wade now is because people never accepted the decision in the first place, which is just understand that is one of the dumber legal arguments that you're going to hear, but it's the dumb legal argument that Sam Alito and the other conservatives are making. And so to match them, what we have to do is to make sure that at every opportunity, every one of these abortion bans is challenged in court from multiple angles. Right? So one angle that I particularly like is to challenge it on religious grounds. People need to remember that the idea that life starts at conception is a religious idea. It's actually a particular sect of fundamentalist Christian idea. Many other religions do not hold that life begins at conception, to say nothing of the people who don't have any religion at all. Right? This is not a scientific point. This is a religious point, and so it should be challenged under the freedom of religion clause. Right? Like people who do not believe that life begins at conception should not be forced to adhere to some Christian fundamentalist view of when life begins. And I'd like to see lawsuits from people on that scale to start with, right? There are equal protection reasons why we should have reproductive justice. If you think about it this way, Roe v. Wade was rested on substantive due process grounds, which is great. I believe in substantive due process. I believe in the right to privacy. But even Ruth Bader Ginsburg noted that there were other ways that one could have secured abortion rights. And I personally always think that equal protection is the better argument for securing abortion rights. A man has, access to their reproductive system during the entirety of the conception process, those 4 or 5 glorious minutes. Man gets to control their bodies. I don't see why women don't get to control their bodies for all 9 months, right? So that's another one I like. There's an Eighth Amendment argument I have that, especially if you're already in prison, if you're not allowed to seek an abortion when you're already in prison and thus in control, your physicality is being controlled by the state. Well, that's a violation of the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. I have an argument there. I have an argument for the 13th Amendment that literally forced labor is already unconstitutional under the 13th Amendment, and there is no state interest. You cannot force people to do the state's work against their will for free. I don't care how important it is to the government that field of cotton gets picked. I don't got to pick it because of the 13th Amendment, and that same argument should apply in the reproductive justice concept. So there are lots of different legal arguments that you can bring. Republicans will knock all of them down, and yet we must bring them anyway.
Absolutely. And now we focused a little bit on the federal level and what repro advocate lawyers will be doing or should be doing, already doing to some degree. Amy, in your cover story for the nation's most recent issue, you report on how the right to abortion has been and will remain a state's issue. And so we're going to focus a little bit on that now. You note how at the same time that anti-abortion organizations have been escalating their strategies at the state level, reproductive rights groups have been divesting from state-based repro groups. So please talk more about that, and in particular, what these strategic decisions made by national organizations end up meaning for the most marginalized groups who are seeking abortion care.
Yeah, so I want to start in Mississippi, right? I mean, Mississippi is going to go down in history now as the state that was behind the Supreme Court case that is going to overturn Roe and end legal abortion as we know it, right? At the center of the Dobbs case is a 15-week abortion ban in Mississippi. And in the news coverage, if you've read anything about this Mississippi case, you've probably seen this woman named Michelle Colon, right? She's the head of a reproductive justice organization in Mississippi called SheRo. And they are working on a whole range of different issues because they operate under this sweeping framework of reproductive justice. So they're thinking about voting rights. They're thinking about the fact that in Mississippi, a huge segment of the Black population is disenfranchised because of felon voting disenfranchisement. They're thinking about the high rates of infant and maternal mortality in the state. They're thinking about abortion access. And when I talked with her about some of her challenges and what she thinks her organization needs for this enormous challenge that's looming on the horizon, she told me her organization has a budget of $100,000. She has not even been able to leave her full-time job, okay? She has 2 co-founders of the organization. They're still working their full-time jobs. And that is stunning to me. And that says something to me about the way resources have been distributed. And I think historically over time, Megan Winter wrote a great book about this called All Politics is Local. And it focuses on how the progressive movement across the spectrum, you know, not just in the area of reproductive rights, but really a whole host of issues, has tended to focus more on national politics, on federal policy, and has retreated from state battles. Abortion in particular has always been a state fight. I mean, of the almost 1,400 abortion restrictions that have been passed now at this point, almost all of them have been at the state level. And so I think it's concerning that we've now seen 2 major national organizations, the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, which I report on in my cover story, and NARAL, that have chosen to get rid of their state affiliate networks right at this pivotal moment when this is going to be a 50-state plus front fight, where this is going to be about city councils and county governments and, you know, advocating for public funding at the state level. And I do think that is beginning to change. I think the sources that I talked to for this piece says that is beginning to shift. There's a shift towards funding more women of color-led, people of color-led organizations and towards funding more state organizations overall. And I hope that things keep trending in that direction because that is where the fight has always been when it comes to this issue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy. And Katha, Katrina read a little bit of your editorial, your really powerful editorial. And, you know, in it, as Katrina noted, you've discussed how it's important not to lose hope. And you quoted Heather Booth, a founder of the Gene Collective, who said to you, quote, "Even in the face of bad decisions and conflict and trouble, we still need to be agents of hope." It's hard to process that on a week when we're all probably feeling a lot of despair, but I would love it if you could just talk a bit more about the steps advocates, and you write about in your piece, the steps advocates should be taking in the absence of reproductive freedom at the federal level, which, as Amy's talked about, Elie's talked about, other folks have talked about, it's never really been a thing for everybody in the United States.
Yeah, well, you know, I don't feel very hopeful. I try, but I'm the you know, the latest school shooting, and then last week the grocery store shooting by that white supremacist. It's very, it gets you down. You know, you just like, what is happening here? But I am wearing my sweatshirt repeal, which comes from the Irish movement to take their abortion ban out of the Constitution, which was, and I also have their mug, free, safe, legal. And these things kind of cheer me up a little bit because, I mean, if they could do it in Ireland, for God's sake, you know, where the church has so much power, it controls so much of society, although that's changing because of all the child molestation that the priests have been up to. People have really, you know, really pissed off about that. But if they could do that, then it can't be impossible. And we have, in fact, seen that globally, abortion is becoming more legal. There are many more countries that have legalized it, besides Ireland, you know, Argentina, Chile, parts of Mexico, and only a handful of states that have made it more criminal, like Poland, for example. and the United States. So I think, it is important to sort of take kind of a long view, because I think the immediate story is not going to be a happy one. But you asked, what could advocates do? And I'm defining advocate very broadly as just a person who cares and wants to get a little bit involved. And so I would say, maybe the most important thing to do is to donate right now to abortion funds. And these are groups that raise money to help provide abortions, help pay for abortions for low-income people. And they do a lot, some of them also will help with the travel that's increasingly necessary. So they'll pay for transportation, they'll pay for lodging, they'll pay for childcare, they'll pay for food. And this is very important as people have to travel more and more. So anyway, you can go on to Fundathon, just put it Fundathon in the search engine. And because right now the National Network of Abortion Funds is having their annual fundraiser, and you can find a fund that's near you and you can donate to them, or you can donate to my page for the New York Abortion Access Fund. I think that's a very important thing to do. But I want to say something else, which is I've seen a lot of people in the wake of all this, just sort of, it's like they want to reinvent the wheel. So they're talking about, oh, we need an underground railroad to get women out of these, banned states. Don't use that phrase. That's very offensive to, especially to Black people, because that's something that's reserved for slavery. People talk about going camping. I'm not sure what that is, but I think it's somehow getting abortion pills, smuggling abortion pills into states. Don't do any of this. You don't have to reinvent. It's not the 60s. There are now organizations that do all these things. What you should do is connect with one of them or two of them. And you can work for them, but doing it on your own is not a good idea, especially since some of this stuff is of questionable legality. I mean, we don't really know how these laws will work, which are getting harsher all the time. But one thing there is, the third thing is support pro-choice candidates. This is really important. And it's a lot of people are getting very discouraged about electoral politics, and it's not hard to see why that is. But this is the wrong moment for that. We really need, as Amy was saying, we really need to change these state legislatures. I'll just say, in New York State, people took the state legislature very seriously. They got rid of a group of official Democrats in the state Senate who were caucusing with the Republicans, and were holding up an enormous amount of good legislation. And now the state legislature is very pro-choice and very progressive in all kinds of ways, and it's really made a difference. So I think it's a long-term thing that's really important, because as Amy pointed out, most abortion legislation takes place in the states. And I have never understood why we have this obsessive focus on federal office, and as if we didn't live where we live. So that's the third thing. So I'll just stop there. I have some other suggestions in my piece, which I hope you'll all go and read.
Thanks so much, Katha. So please don't forget to put your questions in, and we'll get to those in a second. While we're compiling them, I've got another question for Elie, mostly because I just want to say this phrase that you wrote out loud. So one of the ways the US has made it difficult for people to access abortion, even with Roe in place, is the Hyde Amendment, which you correctly described as, quote, a smoldering hunk of misogynist garbage that restricts access to abortion for millions of mostly poor women. While folks are dropping in their questions, as another plug to add your question, can you talk more about why you argue Democrats need to ignore the amendment because it's trash and shouldn't be standing in the way for those most in need? Because even if we just protected Roe, the Hyde Amendment would still be here.
Yeah, so let's start at 30,000 feet, right? The Hyde Amendment is a budgetary rider that's been put into every budget since, I think, 1976, 3 years after Roe. Henry Hyde, congressman from Illinois, put this in to restrict federal funding to be used for abortions. Now, for the most part, that's been interpreted as meaning that you can't use like Medicaid funds to get an abortion, which is a huge problem for women who are women and pregnant people who are economically disadvantaged. They can't use health care funds to go get their health care. So the Hyde Amendment is a huge problem, but we are sitting here staring down the barrel of a Supreme Court forcing women to give birth against their will. And I've got Democrats out here being like, well, can't really do anything because of the Hyde Amendment. Are you kidding me? Do you wonder why we're losing? We are losing because the Republicans are out here acting like they're trying to stop a baby Holocaust. And Democrats are like, oh, the Hyde Amendment, it's so scary. The Hyde Amendment is a budgetary rider. Okay, like the idea that this is some kind of immense stop on every legislative and executive action is just ludicrous. Again, the Hyde Amendment is primarily focused on insurance funding. So one easy way to get around the Hyde Amendment is to make them free, right? Like have abortion services be free, then people don't need to use insurance money to get their medical services. Crowdsource, crowdfund, GoFundMe the doctors who are willing to provide these services. I bet we could get the money together. So that's number one. Number two, the idea that, number two is that the Hyde Amendment could also be repealed. Again, it is a budgetary rider that is put forward through every budget process. Biden, who was a longtime supporter of the Hyde Amendment, finally to be president was just like, oh, maybe the Hyde Amendment isn't such a good idea. Thanks, Joe. Only took you 30 years to get there, but whatever. Welcome to the party. So his initial budget proposal didn't have the Hyde Amendment in it, but Manchin wanted it, and probably a couple of other Democrats that like to hide behind Manchin on this issue, like people like Chris Coons. Always, Manchin is the one who takes all the arrows, but he's not speaking for just himself, right? But so there were enough Democrats that wanted the Hyde Amendment in there for this current budget that Biden caved. You couldn't believe that he caved because you knew Dobbs was coming. You knew this was going to happen, but Biden and the Democrats caved and re-upped the Hyde Amendment. Maybe next year, fiscal year 2023, Democrats could grow a spine and repeal the Hyde Amendment. That would be an easy thing to do. All right. So number one, it should only apply to Medicare funding. Number two, the Democrats can repeal it. Number three, if the Republicans, again, justices say like, oh, well, you can't do this, you can't have that because of the Hyde Amendment. Another thing that Biden could do is ignore them. And I know that is me going a little bit radical. That is me upending the constitutional structure. But there's no actual reason why Biden has to adhere to a bad misinterpretation of the Constitution from the Supreme Court when it comes to the budgetary rider. If he wants to make abortion services available on federal property, which he could, through a series of doctors volunteering their services, which he could, and the Republican Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that, Biden, the commander-in-chief of the army, could say, yeah, great job, Sam Alito, now go enforce that and have fun. All right? So if that's too radical for you, then by all means, join me in making the Democrats repeal the Hyde Amendment in 2023. But you pick one, all right? Because we are at a crisis point in this country. And I'm sick of people telling me well, you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't, no. Pick a thing that you're willing to do and then go do it. Because there are lots of different options. Nothing is not an option. Doing nothing is the thing that's not an option.
There's also the Each Act, right? That was introduced and written. Amy, do you want to talk a bit more about that? I know you've done some reporting around it.
Yeah, I mean, I everything Elie just said, and I just want to draw a parallel between what Katha said about abortion funds and what Elie is saying about the Hyde Amendment, right? Why do abortion funds need to exist? And abortion funds are these local, energetic, amazing organizations. I think all of the most brilliant creative thinkers in our movement are involved in figuring out this massive logistics operation of how to pay for people's abortions and move them to the states where those abortions are possible. And all of that is happening because of this default on this obligation to publicly fund and provide these services, right? Because of the Democrats' failure to full-throatedly put this forward. But okay, I'll be a hope evangelist for a minute here. And I saw there's someone from the National Institute for Reproductive Health in the chat saying, wait a minute, not all national organizations are the same. And it is true. I mean, and I say in my recent cover story, I think the most successful abortion rights campaign of the past decade has been the effort to repeal the Hyde Amendment. And the reason why it's been so successful, and that's involved groups like the National Institute for Reproductive Health and All Above All at the federal level. And then the reason why I think it's been so successful is that it is working at every front. So at the federal level, they've introduced this bill for years now, and each year it gets more and more sponsors. It's called the EACH Act, and it would repeal the Hyde Amendment and the related amendments that strip away public funding of abortion from, not just Medicaid patients in the majority of states, but these restrictions impact Native American people who are in Indian Health Services, people who are incarcerated in federal detention. So we have this federal policy that's gaining momentum. We have this massive success of the fact that they convinced Joe Biden to reverse his longstanding support of the Hyde Amendment. That was no small feat. And then we also have, outside of the spotlight, these same organizations working in coalition with local groups have managed to convince more than 20 cities and counties to pass resolutions calling for the repeal of the Hyde Amendment, including in, purple, red, blue states, in states like North Carolina and Pennsylvania. They've been able to pass these measures. They've managed to pass first of their kind measures in cities like Austin and New York to direct public funding to abortion access. And so I think when we see organizing going on at the city, county, state, federal, that's a really successful formula, at least in this particular case. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement, the reproductive justice framework, the fact that Hyde is so situated in this issue, this framing of abortion as a racial justice issue and as an economic justice issue, I think that's really allowed it to make enormous progress, even as we see a historic defeat at the national level when it comes to legal abortion overall.
Thank you all for your questions. They're great. I know one person, Rosa, had asked about donating to the Oklahoma Abortion Justice Organization. So it's the Roe Fund. You could actually just Google Roe Fund Oklahoma and it should come up. I think we'll also share the link in the chat as well. And then Margaret Siegel, you asked, after the coming decision, will contraception come under attack? And this is coming up with, both long contraceptive methods like an IUD and also other forms of reproductive technology like IVF. And so would open it up to the panel for if anyone would like to jump in. We could start with Katha.
Sorry, repeat the question.
Sure, no problem. The way that contraception is likely to come under attack after the coming decision.
Oh, yes, definitely. Because, it's like the anti-choicers not only have their own opinions, they have their own facts. And among their own facts is that contraception is actually abortion. So if you have an IUD, you're having like an abortion every day. They believe that the emergency pill, which is just a extra dose of birth control pills, basically, they think that destroys a fertilized egg. In fact, it doesn't. It prevents the dropping of a fertilized egg, of an egg to be fertilized. If the egg has already been in place, then it won't work. But they don't accept that. And they think that the regular birth control pill is also an abortion. So that could be their next move. And I think that the thing about IVF is very interesting because IVF, okay, you want a baby. This is a procedure so that you can have a baby. And babies are good. Abortion is bad, but babies are good. But IVF often involves creating more eggs than can be more eggs and fertilized eggs than can be implanted. And so what happens to those extras is that if the parents want to freeze them for the future, that's okay. But if they don't, then they can be just destroyed. So they don't like that either. But times when, like, I think it was in Mississippi, that there was a personhood amendment that would have impacted, or if I hate that word, would have affected IVF. And that was a very powerful argument against passing that personhood bill, because people thought, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to go that far. That's really weird. But, these people are fanatics. And I think we can't forget that. They're very, the minute they win a victory, unlike us, the minute they win a victory, they're on to the next thing immediately. They don't even take the weekend off, because they have a long-term goal of banning everything except getting pregnant by the penis, getting pregnant by the natural way. So it's all true, all these things. It sounded so extreme. And I just want to say one more thing, because I think it's like, I almost want to take a victory lap, and everybody here should too, which is, for years, pro-choicers have been warning about this. They have been saying, they don't want contraception. They want to ban abortion. And the pundits have been saying, oh, this is just to raise money by scaring people. This is never going to happen. This is all part of the American way of life. It's settled law, blah, blah, blah. Not true. I want an apology from all the people who said that, most of whom, I have to say, were men who were just sort of mansplaining to women constantly about how silly it was for women to worry. So who was right? We were right.
Yeah, we always knew they were coming for the birth control. Go ahead, Elie.
So I lied to a priest. I'm Catholic. I lied to a priest once in my life, and it's because I wanted to get married in the church. We had a beautiful church where we wanted to get married. It was gorgeous. But to get married in the Catholic Church, you have to go to something called pre-Cana. You have to take religious instruction from the Catholic Church to be married in the Catholic Church. And I was willing to do it because I wanted this church for my wedding. So, it's at the end of pre-Cana, and the priest who was going to marry us, pulls me inside, and he's just like, well, you must be open to God's will in your marriage. And I know what he's talking about. And I go, Father. And he says, because some people take crazy pills to stop God's will from happening. And I said, can't imagine doing that, Father, which was a complete lie, such that after my wedding, I went to confessional and admitted that I lied to the priest. So, point is that they've been coming for contraception the entire time. There is no distinction in the kind of religious fundamentalist mind between contraception and abortion. But the important thing is that there's no distinction in the Republican jurist's mind either. Because the legal underpinning of Roe v. Wade, the legal underpinning of our reproductive rights, is the exact same as the legal underpinning of contraception rights. It all goes back to a case called Griswold v. Connecticut, which is the case that first acknowledged, the right to privacy under substantive due process of the 14th Amendment. And it's that right, the right to privacy, that is what gets you to abortion. But at first, it was used to get you to contraception. And I'll tell you what else it's going to get. What else the right to privacy it rests on, which they will come for first before they come for contraception. It's gay marriage. Because marital rights, the right to privacy within your own marriage, the right to get busy in a Burger King bathroom with whomever, however you want to, all of that is also under the right to privacy. And so, having won this victory against abortion, the next thing they're coming for is actually gay marriage, and they're telling you they'll do it. To go to Katha's points, these people do not lie when they talk about what they're coming after next. So Senator Mike Braun from Indiana made the comment that he thought Loving should be overturned. That's the case that allows for interracial marriages. Senator John Cornyn for Texas specifically called out Obergefell during the Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation hearings. That's where they're coming next, the right to marry whoever you want. And then they'll get to contraception because it's all the same legal underpinning. So yeah, people should be concerned about that. But as Katha said, people should have been concerned about abortion rights for the past 30 years also, and only a few of us were. So at some point, you're going to have to get in the game, and you're going to have to take on these conservative justices who have a plan to take away everything.
Exactly right. Since Roe, they were planning, and even, the day of, there's recording of religious leaders in the anti-abortion movement talking about overturning Roe. So this was always the plan, right? Jean asked, why are the Democrats not marrying mass shootings and the self-described pro-life hypocrisy together? Elie talked about this a little bit before, that they don't care. Also, I wanted to mention, because we published a piece yesterday by John Nichols, Ruben Gallego in Arizona, representative in Congress, did in fact call it out very specifically. He called Ted Cruz a baby killer on Twitter, because there is clearly hypocrisy around it, but the question is how much it motivates people. I'm not sure if anyone else on the panel wants to elaborate on that, but I did think it was an important question to address.
I think that gets into the whole issue of the motivation of people who, unlike all of us and the people in the chat too, obsessively think about these things. There's a big question now of like, how important will reproductive rights be in the upcoming midterms, and then moving on to 2024. And I would love to believe that we will see this outpouring of pro-choice people. Most Americans support Roe. And it would be great. I would love to think that they'll all be there voting. But people just seem very preoccupied and passive and kind of depressed and sour. So I don't know. I'd love to know what other people think.
But also people are voting and the Democrats aren't doing anything. And so I think people are also feeling like, we're doing what you're doing. We're going to keep doing what you're doing. And you're not doing anything, Democrats. So tell us,
Well, I don't think it's true that the Democrats aren't doing anything. I think, for example, in New York State, the Democrats got reproductive rights, enshrined. And that's happened in 16 states now.
But there's a difference between state, I think, Katha, that I think that's a crucial distinction. I think there's a difference between progressive lawmakers who have really pushed the envelope at the state level, and then what we're seeing from congressional leaders and from the president on this, right? I mean, there's this whole campaign to even get Joe Biden to say the word abortion out loud. A lot of people wanted him to make an emergency address as soon as this leaked opinion came out. And I think it's interesting, this idea of it. I don't think it's hypocrisy. I think Elie's right that what we're seeing is a Republican Party and an anti-abortion agenda that are so closely melded. And it's actually very consistent if you keep in mind that the Christian right and the Republican Party, which have been in lockstep for decades, and that's been the secret formula, right? What they want is the valorization of the white patriarchal nuclear family with as many kids as possible and no birth control and, all straight marriage and, and no trans people can exist. And that's actually been a pretty consistent ideology. And the second they wedded themselves to the Republican Party, which is focused on stripping the social safety net, and taking away, any kind of economic benefits for poor families. I mean, that's actually been a very consistent agenda. They haven't diverted from that. But I think what we're seeing is really the deficit between the extent to which the Republican Party has embraced abortion as an issue that will help it rise to power, and then the tentativeness on the Democratic side, and the fact that abortion rights groups, national abortion rights groups that are relying on the Democrats just are at a serious disadvantage, because there's been, dating back to the safe, legal, and rare days in the 90s, right? Democrats have often seen abortion rights as a liability rather as the popular political issue that it in fact is.
There's also a thing to be said about Democrats' unwillingness to fight for voting rights. Republicans, I keep saying, Republicans are not stupid. There is a reason why Republicans on the Supreme Court took away voting rights first before they came for abortion rights. And it is because, as Katha and Amy have both been saying, abortion rights are incredibly popular. And you can't actually succeed in taking away abortion rights without having an immense popular backlash unless you first cut off voting rights, which is exactly what they did. So one of the reasons that we are worried about the 2022 midterms, despite the massively unpopular steps that the Republicans are taking, is because the Republicans have done such a good job of cutting off voting rights and gerrymandering away what voting rights are left. We've got Republicans who are openly saying they're going to throw away votes if they get in power. Republican secretaries of state, Republican gubernatorial candidates openly saying they will throw away votes if the election doesn't go the way they want it to go. And that is a way of protecting themselves, of inculcating themselves against the backlash of the popular will. There is a reason why Mitch McConnell stole the Supreme Court, because he wanted the unelected, unaccountable judges to take away voting rights because he knew the Senate couldn't do it. Mitch McConnell could not get an abortion ban bill through the United States Senate. It is too unpopular. So he has to do it through the unelected, unaccountable Supreme Court. So again, I always come back to either you take control of the Supreme Court or you have nothing. Nothing can survive 6 conservatives on the Supreme Court. Nothing good can survive 6 conservatives on the Supreme Court, and it all starts with voting rights, which they already done stripped away.
So what can we do about the Supreme Court,
Yeah,
right?
really.
Expansion! Expansion is the only way to deal with it. I always argue for plus 20 judges to make the Supreme Court a 29 member body that has a lot of reform ideas as well as political revenge ideas. People always say, well, like, if you expand the Supreme Court, then won't Republicans expand the Supreme Court too? Yeah, sure. How is that worse? We're already losing 6-3. If we start losing 16-13, how is that worse than where we are right now, right? The other thing is that if you expand the Supreme Court, you have a Supreme Court that will support voting rights, which will make it hard for Republicans to take back all of government again. So you need to focus on the courts, you need to expand the Supreme Courts, but to do that, you have to elect Democrats who care about the Supreme Court. And so far, we've been very bad at doing that. And I put it to you this way. Republicans understand that they will lose elections, they will lose primaries if they are soft on the courts. Donald Trump, right? Comes down the escalator, cursing off Mexicans. He's all crazy, outside the box. What about the Supreme Court, Donald? Oh, well, here's my list. The one place where Donald Trump tacked right to the mainstream center of the Republican establishment was when it came to the Supreme Court. They made him give out that list of FedSoc-approved judges because Donald Trump wouldn't have won the primary if Republicans thought he was going to mess with their judges. Now flip it to the Democratic side. Name for me when the last time a Democrat lost a primary because they were soft on the courts. It's a trick question because the answer is never. Never has a Democrat lost a primary because they were soft on the courts. Joe Biden was the weakest on the courts of the entire field in 2020. The coffee man was more interested in the courts than Joe Biden was in 2020. And yet, didn't cost him a vote. Didn't cost him a vote. That's how Democrats are. And as long as we continue to be like that, Republicans will always have an advantage on the Supreme Court because they prioritize it. It's as simple as that.
We could go on. There are so many great questions too, but I know we're getting close to the end. So I wanted to do just like an end round robin where everyone could just share one thing that everyone can do today to contribute to this fight for reproductive freedom. And that one thing could be literally anything. So please, and who would like to go first? I don't want to put you all on the hot spot because I didn't prepare you for this question.
Just one thing.
Just one thing.
Well,
Who's-
I'll go first. I would say donate to an abortion fund or other really great reproductive rights organizations of the ones like the ones Amy has mentioned, and connect with them. Do a little more than just sending them some money, to connect with them and see if you can get involved in some way. And then spread the word, tell your friends.
I think pay attention to what's going on in your local city council and your local state legislature. That is where, states are making history constantly with repealing existing abortion restrictions on the books, with issuing public funding of abortion. And think big. I think, okay, that's two things, but think big. I mean, I want to acknowledge a point that Candace made here in the chat, that Black women have been fighting to get rid of the Hyde Amendment since 1976. I've been thinking a lot about Faye Waddleton, the first Black woman to head Planned Parenthood, who stood up in the 1970s when Hyde was fresh and said, we have to repeal this amendment because if we don't restore access for Medicaid patients, then they are coming for everyone else next. And I think it gives me chills to think about what if the movement, I mean, I wasn't around back then, but what if the white-led groups and everyone within her own organization had listened back then, had listened to her drawing a firm line in the sand and thinking big and bold all the way back then. Where will we be now?
Be openly against forced birth. We've kind of hit on this a couple of times during this conversation, but one of the real asymmetries in this fight is that Republicans have acted like they have the moral high ground, and they do not. Forced birth is evil. It is illegitimate. It is not something that a legitimate state power can ask a person to do. I always think about, like, it is amazing that there are women who are willing to do this willingly, right? Because, like, it seems horrible to me. And the fact that you have anybody who's willing to do it, there are women who are willing to do it twice, which is, what? What? You went through that once, you're going to do it again? And yet the state wants to come and force somebody to do it against their will? That is crazy. But for too long, liberals have acted like they are afraid of abortion, as Amy was saying, like it's a political liability. Like, abortion is kind of icky. I mean, I guess you have to have choice, but no, abortion is not an icky subject. Abortion is not something to be embarrassed about. It's liberals who have the moral high ground, because we stand on the ground that people have autonomous control over their own selves. We stand on the ground that one's belief in the invisible sky gods cannot impact secular laws. We have the moral high ground, and we need to start acting like that. We need to start showing people that we do, because that's actually where the debate needs to be now, right? We are done with the kind of footsie of can't we all get along? No, we can't. Apparently we can't all get along. So now we have to be morally confident in where we stand, and that's a change that everybody can make in their own lives. That's a change that everybody can make in their own networks, in their own groups. Stop being afraid of the issue, stop being afraid of the word, and start being a crusader for this cause, because that's what the Republicans have, crusaders, and we have to meet them.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Elie. Thank you, Katha. Thank you to everyone who attended this conversation. And we just appreciate what you're doing and sharing all of this great work. And so thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you on the next conversation. Bye, everybody.